The UK online safety bill has quickly become the internet's latest villain. On paper, it's a child protection law specific to the United Kingdom, but over the past week, my feed has been absolutely flooded with outrage from American influencers warning that this new legislation somehow threatens the internet as a whole. At first glance, it might seem like a typical online overreaction, but if you scratch the surface beneath, the outrage tells us something far more revealing, something about how power, influence and control actually work on the internet. Because while it might seem absurd to some that British law could have any real impact overseas, most of the global rules we follow online today originated in the United States, and that raises a bigger question, one that very few people seem to be willing to ask. Is this really about freedom, or is it about who gets to write the rules for everyone else? Because, to me at least, this very much feels like a classic case of the pot calling the kettle black, especially when so many of the US-based gaming channels I've seen weighing in on this have spoken about my country with a level of blind hatred and vitriol that feels wildly disproportionate towards a country, actually scratch that, towards an entire continent that most of them have never set foot on and likely never will. There are so many moving parts to this reaction that, honestly, I don't know where to start, at least. Not until I sat down and sketched out my essay structure. And just so we're clear before we go any further, this is not a defense of the online safety bill. Far from it. The thing's got more holes in it than Pirate Software's t-shirt after giving new mothers unsolicited advice on how to breastfeed. What I am looking at here, though, is the backlash, which, from what I've seen at least, seems to be fueled by far more than people simply worrying about having to verify their age before watching dogging videos. In fact, thanks to the recent actions of the Australia-based Collective Shout, you're going to struggle to experience such scenarios in your video games too, but don't worry, there's still plenty of cheap fun to be had. While all this international censorship might be terrifying to some, terrify yourself on your own terms by pre-ordering Silent Hill F Deluxe Edition with a 36% discount using my link. And once you calm down, you can also grab 43% off Expedition 33, 37% off Black Myth Wukong, 29% off Stellar Blade, and 32% off the stunning Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, all through my discount links below. Every game that you see throughout this video, as well as literally thousands of other titles, is up to as much as 90% off. So whether you're panic buying before another purge or just stockpiling before age verification asks you to submit a stool sample, don't pay full price like a muppet. Click the pinned comment, build your collection, and enjoy the games you actually want while you still can. Happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Now, gather round as Mama Decade explains a few things. Many Americans, especially those entrenched in tech, politics and online culture wars, are reacting angrily to the UK's Online Safety Act because they see it as a creeping threat to the core values like free speech, privacy and platform independence. Although the law was designed to protect children and users from harmful content, many in the US argue it sets a dangerous precedent that could ripple across borders and affect platforms globally, including American ones. One of the biggest concerns is freedom of expression. Prominent American figures such as Republican Congressman Jim Jordan have warned that the bill risks creating a chilling effect on lawful speech. Critics argue that the broad and somewhat vague language of the act could be used to suppress or police content that is simply unpopular or politically inconvenient. This fuels long-standing fears in the US about government overreach and censorship, particularly when coming from a foreign power. There's also the issue of extraterritorial impact. The UK law technically applies only within its own jurisdiction, but in practice, it demands global tech firms like X, Reddit or Rumble to comply with UK rules or risk huge fines. This raises alarm bells for American users and companies who feel their access to content could be filtered through UK legislation, even though they're not subject to UK laws. It's seen as a sovereignty issue where Britain is perceived to be meddling in global internet governance. Privacy campaigners in the US are particularly alarmed by the bill's implications for encryption. The Act empowers UK regulator Ofcom to mandate that companies scan encrypted messages for illegal content, especially child exploitation material. While the goal is noble, critics argue that breaking or weakening encryption for one purpose inevitably compromises privacy for everyone. For Americans used to strong constitutional protections around privacy and expression, this is viewed as a massive overreach that threatens the very architecture of secure digital communication. This has already led to a legal backlash. Groups representing American free speech and tech interests are reportedly preparing challenges against aspects of the law, particularly its potential application to US-based businesses. They argue that even voluntary compliance could violate American laws or constitutional protections. There's growing momentum behind a transatlantic pushback, with online communities, civil liberties organizations, and even some US lawmakers vowing to resist what they view as the UK exporting its regulations to the rest of the world. In short, while the UK Online Safety Act may have been born out of a desire to make the internet safer, many Americans see it as part of a broader pattern of authoritarian digital regulation. They worry that it will be used to control discourse, undermine privacy, and force American companies to become enforcers of foreign censorship standards. Now, while all of this is fascinating in its own right, I'm starting to see two major problems with how the UK Online Safety Bill is being discussed in American online spaces. First, and I won't name names here because frankly it's just too embarrassing, but I've seen creators speak on this topic with total confidence while getting virtually everything wrong. And yet, judging by the comment sections, their audiences are lapping it all up without a question. To give just one example, there's a larger channel I stumbled across that appeared to not know the UK is no longer in the EU, ranting about how the EU should be doing something about this, while appearing to comment on geopolitics with all the insight of someone who's never left their home state. It's not just a slip-up, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the context they're trying to present as fact. And here's the thing, Brexit was arguably the largest and most important democratic exercise in world history, certainly to the British people at least. Love it or hate it, it happened. And yet these self-styled experts are out here confidently analysing European politics while showing absolutely zero working knowledge of how anything outside the US even functions. It's like watching someone play chess without knowing the pieces move, except their viewers are nodding along like they've just witnessed a master stroke. It's genuinely awkward to watch creators with such certainty while getting every key fact wrong, especially when they're ranting about things like propaganda, when they are the very individuals who are actually spreading it. It's one thing to get the facts wrong when you were talking about what year a game was released or who developed certain consoles wrong. The best of us do make mistakes, but when videos seem deliberately crafted to stir up hatred, built on a messy cocktail of misinformation and disinformation, which are clearly driven more by knee-jerk emotional responses than by even the most basic of research, then maybe geopolitics isn't your lane. Geopolitics isn't another neatly packaged anti-woke outrage cycle. It's something far more complex. Which leads me to the second issue, the sheer double standards on display. The same voices decrying the UK's overreach seem completely blind to the decades of overreach in their own country. Politicians, pundits, and popular YouTubers alike have decried it as an attack on free speech, a danger to encryption, and a threat to the open internet. Some are even calling it the start of a digital dictatorship, but beneath the drama lies a deeper irony. The very people shouting the loudest are used to being the ones in charge. For decades, American laws, platforms, and cultural norms have shaped the internet that the rest of the world uses. So, when the UK dares to assert its own standards, ones that might even force American companies to change their behaviour, the result isn't just criticism, it's panic. Let's start with the most obvious point. The internet is structurally and culturally American. Nearly all of the major platforms, YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, Patreon, Reddit, Twitch, they're all headquartered in the United States. They're built under American law, governed by American understandings of free speech, and moderated according to the rules and cultural assumptions that reflect American values. If something is banned in Germany but allowed in Texas, chances are that it stays online unless German authorities push for its removal. In practice, the default setting of the internet is American first. That's not a conspiracy, it's just the outcome of American technological dominance. This dominance extends far beyond content moderation, though. The legal frameworks underpinning most online interactions are rooted in US policy. The DMCA, for example, has been enforced globally. You can have your content taken down in France, Japan, or the UK for violating American copyright laws, even if those laws don't exist in your own country. The same applies to sanctions enforcement. Platforms like PayPal or Patreon will freeze accounts not because the user did anything illegal where they live, but because US foreign policy demands it. In short, America has been exporting its laws via the internet for years. This hasn't caused much public outrage among Americans because it's their rules being followed. Yet, the minute another country tries to do the same thing, especially a close ally like the UK, the response is outrage. The UK's Online Safety Act includes provisions that could require platforms to proactively scan content for harmful material, potentially compromise encrypted messaging, and demand age verification for adult content. As we know, these measures have sparked serious concerns from privacy advocates and free speech defenders, many of them entirely valid, but they've also been wildly exaggerated by American commentators who present the law not just as flawed, but as a full-blown authoritarian overreach. That kind of rhetoric is only possible when you assume that your own country's influence over the internet is normal and benign, and everyone else's is dangerous. What's more, the lens through which Americans are reacting is itself deeply shaped by US political culture. While it of course has many detractors domestically, the average British citizen doesn't see the Online Safety Act as the arrival of tyranny. They see it as a flawed but earnest attempt to make the internet safer for children. It's being debated like any other piece of legislation within the context of UK law and British values. The UK doesn't have a First Amendment. It has a legal framework that balances free speech with harm prevention, and this is widely accepted by the public. But to Americans, especially those in libertarian or populist circles, any government regulation of online content is inherently sinister. This is a projection of American political anxieties onto a foreign law. And that projection has consequences. American YouTubers and commentators have huge global audiences. When they frame the Online Safety Act as censorship, that framing travels, spreading fear and resentment not just of the law itself, but of the UK more broadly. It warps the debate, makes compromise harder, and risks dragging British domestic policy into the toxic swamp of the US culture war. In effect, Americans are doing exactly what they accuse the UK of doing, imposing their standards, their fears, and their political framing on everyone else. The reality is this. The UK Online Safety Act is one of the first serious efforts by a non-American country to regulate the internet on its own terms and to force American tech companies to comply. That's the part that really stings. The pushback isn't about encryption or overreach, it's about control. For the first time, American platforms may have to answer to a legal system that isn't their own, one they didn't write, and one that might even conflict with their interests. So when Americans complain that the UK is exporting censorship, it's worth remembering who's been exporting what and for how long. So this backlash isn't just about speech or safety, it's a reminder that the internet may be global, but up until now, it's mostly been governed by one country's rules. The UK Online Safety Act challenges that assumption. And for some in America, that's the real reason to be afraid. Recently on this channel, I uploaded a deep dive video exploring MatPat's so-called creator economy caucus, along with the many unanswered questions surrounding it, especially the glaring lack of transparency around its funding and who actually stands to benefit. It's a juicy hour-long watch, so check it out once you've finished this one. But there was one moment in particular that stood out, perfectly illustrating the double standards we're unpacking in today's video. At the launch of the Congressional Creators Caucus in June of 2025, New York Representative Yvette Clarke made a telling remark. Speaking to the future impact of the caucus, Clarke said, "The work that we are doing with this caucus will have global implications because, indeed, when you're an online platform, not only are you being exposed to the vast market that is the United States of America, but we are a nation that is emulated around the world. And so the work that we do through this caucus will have ripple effects globally." Her words weren't inaccurate, they were simply unguarded, and in that honesty lies the heart of a glaring double standard. When America regulates the internet, it's seen as leadership. But when other countries try to do the same, it's suddenly being called by the same nation as overreach, censorship, and authoritarianism. Clarke's statement is significant because it openly acknowledges what many already understand but rarely say aloud. America sets the rules of the internet not just for itself but for the world. From its economic clout to its near-total domination of tech infrastructure and digital platforms, the United States doesn't merely participate in the global internet, it defines it. The US First Amendment, for example, shapes platform policies far more than any European or Asian standard ever could. And those policies do have ripple effects globally, as Clarke admitted. Whether it's how hate speech is defined, which creators get monetized, or what constitutes misinformation, the default settings of online life are largely American. Foreign creators, users, and even governments are often left reacting to decisions made in Silicon Valley or Washington, decisions that affect billions of people worldwide without any input from them. This is why the outrage from American commentators and lawmakers over the UK's Online Safety Act feels so disingenuous. The Act, which aims to compel platforms to better protect children, scan for illegal content, and enforce age verification for adult sites, has been framed in American discourse as a dystopian crackdown on liberty. Civil liberties groups in the US have called it a dangerous precedent, but that outrage only makes sense if you ignore what Clarke freely admitted. America already does this, just in reverse. The Congressional Creators Caucus, featuring prominent figures like YouTuber MatPat, isn't simply about creator welfare or tax reform. It's a vehicle for shaping the regulatory frameworks that platforms will increasingly follow, and not just in the US. The caucus's policy goals, ranging from algorithm transparency to AI ethics, will almost certainly influence global standards, because platforms rarely want to fragment their systems across different jurisdictions. Just as the DMCA reshapes global copyright enforcement and US sanctions law affects accounts in countries halfway around the world, the policies coming out of this caucus will extend beyond America's borders, precisely because the US market is so dominant. And yet, when the UK tries to regulate platforms operating within its own borders, American influencers cry foul. When Brussels pushes for digital sovereignty through EU regulation, it's branded as bureaucratic interference. When Australia demands that tech companies pay publishers for news, Silicon Valley threatens to pull out. The message is clear. Only America is allowed to regulate the global internet. Everyone else is expected to accept the consequences of American policy, but never to impose their own. So when Yvette Clarke says that America is a nation that is emulated around the world, she's not wrong. But what she reveals, perhaps unintentionally, is that American policymakers fully understand the global weight of their decisions. They know that shaping policy in Washington means shaping policy for the entire internet, and they are happy to wield that influence so long as no one else does. And that there is the double standard. American dominance is considered natural. British regulation is seen as an intrusion. US content rules are called freedom. Foreign content rules are called censorship. The Congressional Creators Caucus is hailed as visionary. The UK's Online Safety Act is denounced as dangerous. What Clark's quote makes painfully clear is that this isn't about whether countries should regulate the internet, it's about who's allowed to and who isn't. At the heart of the Online Safety Bill is the requirement for age assurance on platforms hosting adult content or other material deemed harmful to children. This includes the possibility of age verification through government-issued ID, credit checks, biometric scans and other so-called highly effective methods. Critics have seized on the proposals as an intolerable breach of privacy and personal liberty. Yet in the United States, where many of these voices reside, such verification methods are already commonplace in a wide range of industries. Take online gambling as a prime example. In most US states where it's legal, gambling websites are required to perform Know Your Customer or KYC checks that verify a user's identity, age and location. These checks rely on the same tools: ID scans, facial recognition and IP or GPS tracking. The same applies to purchasing alcohol or tobacco online, signing up to trade cryptocurrency or accessing adult websites through legal channels. These were already existing, enforced regulations that have been quietly accepted by Americans for years. So once again, let me ask you, why is it acceptable in the US but Orwellian in the UK? Why is protecting users from fraud or underage gambling considered responsible governance, but protecting children from graphic online content framed as tyranny? Well, I think we are beginning to build a pretty clear picture as to why. When American creators rail against the UK bill while ignoring similar frameworks back home, they're not just being inconsistent, they're engaging in a form of cultural projection that pretends surveillance and regulation are uniquely European sins. That said, as I mentioned at the beginning, not all of the criticism of the Online Safety Bill is invalid or hypocritical. Many British citizens, civil rights groups and internet freedom advocates have raised serious concerns about the bill's scope, ambiguity and enforcement mechanisms. There are legitimate fears about how platforms will interpret vague definitions of harmful content and whether smaller creators or websites will be unfairly penalised. The bill's potential to suppress satire, political speech or artistic expression cannot be dismissed. Likewise, requiring ID just to view legal content online opens the door to serious privacy violations, particularly if that data is collected or stored insecurely. These are nuanced debates rooted in the specific legal and cultural context of the UK. They deserve thoughtful engagement, not reductive comparisons to dictatorships or baseless claims that Britain is banning the internet. But when American influences with no legal stake in the matter reduce the issue to clickbait slogans and cultural theatrics, the conversation suffers. Worse, it distracts from their own domestic landscape, where surveillance powers are often broader and more opaque than anything proposed in the UK bill. The United States has a long history of mass surveillance and government overreach. The Patriot Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and widespread National Security Agency data collection are rarely mentioned in these conversations, despite their direct impact on privacy and civil liberties. While these same American commentators fret over the idea of age gates on UK porn sites, they rarely address the vast data mining practices of tech companies, the unaccountable role, up until recently at least, of many payment processors, or the chilling effect of corporate censorship. The outrage is selective, the lens is narrow, and the context is conveniently ignored. And for the record, I do not believe criticism of the UK Online Safety Bill is inherently a double standard, but it becomes one when people apply vastly different standards to similar systems based solely on where they occur. Age verification, identity checks and content moderation already exists in the US, yet they are often accepted without question in commercial settings. To portray the UK as uniquely repressive while ignoring the regulatory state at home is not just misleading, it's intellectually dishonest. But to understand why this reaction is so prevalent at present, we need to dig another layer deeper. The UK is not alone at present in receiving heavy doses of criticism from certain American influences. They also seem to have made Canada one of their targets, along with the entirety of the European Union, but none of this has happened out of nowhere. While tensions between the United States and Europe have historically been rooted in trade disputes or defense contributions, the Trump administration's second term has pushed the relationship into uncharted ideological territory. This rupture extends not just through traditional diplomacy or military alliances, but now directly into the digital realm, where American creators, tech elites, and political figures increasingly treat European regulation not as a difference in governance, but as a direct threat to their cultural dominance. The extreme vilification of the UK Online Safety Act is not a coincidence. It's part of a growing ideological framework in which European regulation is interpreted as an attack on American freedom. The new wave of US digital nationalism, especially within the MAGA movement. It's the same logic J.D. Vance used to describe European immigration policy, and the same outrage Elon Musk channels when threatening to pull out of the European markets over content moderation rules. Europe's refusal to simply accept the tech status quo crafted in California is increasingly viewed as rebellion rather than sovereignty. This is more than just a cultural difference, it's cultural warfare. The United States, particularly its right-wing elite, has begun exporting a narrative that paints European regulation as inherently dystopian, unfree, and self-destructive. In this worldview, European digital laws are not just misguided, they are evidence of a civilization in decline, one that needs saving, or failing that, needs to be mocked, humiliated, and undermined. The UK's Online Safety Act may not be flawless, but the vehemence of the American reaction says less about the bill itself and more about America's own internal anxieties and projections. The irony is unavoidable. These same critics who decry surveillance states and digital ID tyranny when it happens in Europe turn a blind eye to the vast domestic surveillance infrastructure that underpins much of American life. What they oppose is not authoritarianism. What they oppose is the idea of Europe asserting its own digital sovereignty. This double standard is not just intellectually dishonest, it is geopolitically dangerous. It reinforces the growing sentiment in European capitals that the United States can no longer be trusted as a partner in defending liberal democratic values. It is no longer just MAGA politicians showing open disdain for Europe, it is also Silicon Valley CEOs, YouTube commentators, and so-called free speech activists who seem to view European attempts to build a safer or fairer internet as an existential affront. In this context, the cultural backlash to the UK Online Safety Bill is no isolated phenomenon. It is a manifestation of the same ideological conflict fueling the broader transatlantic rift. The same machinery that turns European diplomacy into a punchbag for MAGA grievance now targets European regulation in the tech sphere. And as Vice President Vance has made clear, even social media policy can be enough to threaten NATO. So, where does that leave Britain and Europe? Increasingly, it places them in the awkward position of having to defend their own laws, not just against domestic critics, but also against a wave of imported outrage engineered in the United States. The question is no longer whether Europe and America disagree on policy. The question is whether they even share the same reality anymore. For one side, the internet is a space for cultural dominance, unaccountable platforms, and free markets above all. For the other, it is a space that requires balance, accountability, and protection for the vulnerable. As the ideological distance widens, the backlash to bills like the UK's Online Safety Act offers a warning. When American cultural power sees European self-determination as an affront, when every law passed outside Washington is treated like a threat to freedom itself, then digital sovereignty becomes one more battleground in a larger war. And the transatlantic alliance, already battered by tariffs, insults, and open contempt, risks further decay, not just in the halls of power, but in the algorithms, platforms, and comment sections where this new Cold War is being fought. Ultimately, what this entire saga reveals is the urgent need for viewers to start applying a little discernment. Time and again, we see supposedly anti-establishment influencers latch onto complex issues and reduce them to hysterical soundbites designed to enrage not inform. These creators position themselves as truth tellers, yet they rarely scratch below the surface, regurgitating Twitter talking points or half-read headlines in a tone that mimics a Daily Mail op-ed written all in capital letters. It's theatre, it's not analysis, and sadly, it's dangerously effective. So if there's one thing to take away from this video, it's this. Stop mistaking volume for insight. Just because someone shouts the loudest about tyranny or censorship doesn't mean they've done the reading. In an age where policy is global and platforms are weaponized, it's never been more important to ask who's actually being affected, who stands to gain, and who's just farming outrage for views. The world is complicated, but that doesn't mean you have to be fooled by people who aren't. And these people, indeed, make the world feel much scarier than it really is. But not as scary as pre-ordering Silent Hill F Deluxe Edition with a 36% discount using my link. And once you calm down, you can also grab 43% off Expedition 33, 37% off Black Myth Wukong, 29% off Stellar Blades, and 32% off these stunning Wu-Chang Fallen Feathers, all through my discount links below. Every game that you saw throughout this video, as well as literally thousands of other titles, are up to as much as 90% off, so whether you're panic buying before another purge, or just stockpiling before age verification asks you to submit that store sample, don't pay full price like a muppet. Click the pinned comment, build your collection, and enjoy the games you actually want while you still can. Or, if you would like to support me in a more personal way and would like to access my behind-the-scenes cosplay library, then please consider backing me over on Patreon. No encryption needed.